Okay. So welcome all. This is to the National Print Museum. This is our first virtual talk, and we're delighted to have Dr Dermot McGuinne present on the Rome Irish type. The talk today will be chaired by Jamie Murphy. Both Jamie and Dermot are on our curatorial committee, so we're delighted that they both agreed to take part in this talk this afternoon. Just to say that Jamie is, for those of you who don't know, Jamie is a letterpress and a typography enthusiast based in Dublin. He works with students at Distillers Press in NCAD and collaborators at the Salvage Press. He is a member of the curatorial committee here at the National Print Museum. So I will pass over to Jamie now to introduce Dermot, and thank you all for attending, and we look forward to a little chat afterwards.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks to the National Print Museum for inviting me along to be a part of this afternoon. I'm going to give a little introduction to Dermot, which has been certainly doctored for my advantage here into just about 3 sentences. So Dermot McGuinne gained his primary degree and early experience as a graphic designer in the United States, where he later held the position of art director of the University of Iowa Press and Publications Department. Contemporary practitioners will know the University of Iowa as one of the foremost letterpress and book arts universities in the States. Dermot was awarded his doctorate from Trinity for his work, which he completed on the subject of the Irish character in print. He is also the author of Irish type design and various articles on this topic. He is a retired senior lecturer and head of departments of fine art and visual communication design at what is now known as the Technological University of Dublin, formerly DIT, where he presently serves on the curatorial committee of the National Print Museum. It's in this capacity that I first met Dermot. I had, of course, I had heard of his book, Irish Type Design, previously, which was first published in 1992 by the Irish Academic Press, and the second edition published by the Print Museum. Dermot's going to talk to us about his detective work, his investigatory work into the Rome Irish type this afternoon, which I'm sure tens of thousands of us are looking forward to. So without further ado, here is Dr. Dermot McGuinne.
Thanks for that, Jamie. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues here at the National Print Museum in Dublin for giving me the opportunity of presenting this talk. My topic, as Jamie has said, is the 17th century Irish character printing type of the Office of the Propaganda of the Faith in Rome. Now, if anyone has any, well, you haven't seen my share screen, so perhaps when you do see it, if anyone has any problems with the fact that the word Irish in the title is spelled with a lowercase I just want to assure everyone that that is correct, since in this case it refers to a type style rather than being of Ireland, so to speak. So that out of the way, of all of the Irish type styles that I've examined, and there have been more than 20 prepared over the years, this particular one gave me great satisfaction in that it brought me on a journey of discovery filled with intrigue that through sheer determination and persistence resulted in some very worthwhile outcomes. And I welcome the opportunity to share this story with you. Before we turn to the Rome Irish printing type, it would be useful, and here I'll share screen, and bear with me because I'm new to this procedure, but I should be getting my share screen up. And here we are. Share, yeah. Okay. That's it now, and there is the word Irish with the lowercase I, which I thought would be on the screen when I said that. But before we turn to this Rome Irish printing type, it would be useful to take a step back in time and consider Mary, how do I do that? I want to page down.
Yeah, that should be it.
No.
No, not working. Let me just check, sorry.
Okay, what do I do?
Oh, no, it's just there.
Okay. Sorry, I had a bit of difficulty there with changing the page, but as I was saying, before we turn to the Rome Irish printing type, it would be useful to take a step backwards and take a look at this font, which we call the Louvain A type. Now, it was prepared for the Irish Franciscans in exile in Louvain, just 40 or so kilometers from the place where it was produced, in the Planten foundry in Antwerp in 1611. And it was most likely the work of an Irish type founder, Thomas Strong, who was employed there at the time. This rough proof was uncovered recently in the Planten Moretus archives and is of particular interest in that it shows a range of 3 sizes modelled on the handwriting style of Bonaventure Hussey, who was later the guardian at the college and author of the catechism where the type was first used. It demonstrates, I think, a rather sophisticated understanding of the use of ligatures and special characters commonly found in early Irish manuscripts, which influenced these typefaces as they emerged. However, it is rather crudely cut, and as such provided an unfortunate model for those Irish fonts that immediately followed. Cleverly, the letters were cut in 3 sizes intended for use as a single font, with capitals, lowercase, and a large title display size. Alternative sorts for some of the letters were prepared, providing the possibility of using them as capitals, lowercase, and small caps as required. Now, perhaps a little note here might help understand all that. The Irish alphabet, unlike many others, shows little difference between its lowercase letters and its capital letters. And a few letters, such as the A, and you see the lowercase version of it on the 3rd line, other letters, and not too many of them, are different in the lowercase, the or, capital or, and N, and a few others. So if these new alternate sorts were added to the lowercase, it could be used as capitals or lowercase as required. So what was a fairly new notion, small caps at the time, could appear in the publications using this font. Now, this was a time when some Irish Franciscans had moved from Louvain to Rome and other locations throughout Europe, bringing with them their interest in publishing Irish material and their experience in printing Irish language texts. The great Irish scholar Luke Wadding, who had helped to establish both the Franciscan house at St. Isidore and the Irish College in Rome, provided a most notable supportive presence. It was also a time when Oliver Plunkett was gaining a scholarly reputation at the very college of the propagation of the faith. So if influence and pull were as important then as they are today, the Irish were well placed to see this project underway. In 1638, approval was granted for the production of this Irish printing type. A craftsman named John the Teuton, possibly Giovanni Hermanskircher, was commissioned to cut the punches, which part of the cost expected to be offset by the later sale of cast fonts. It was not till 1676, however, that the first book, Lochran na Gréabhach, Light of the Faith, shown on the left here, by Francis O'Malloy, was printed with this font. In the following year, it was used to print an Irish grammar by the same author, which in fact was the first secular book to have been printed in Irish. In both these early works, the style of setting is of particular interest, with the large letter size that I've alluded to being used for chapter heads and often in an apparently inconsistent fashion throughout the text as capital letters, frequently in conjunction with the use of the regular capital letters. The font was used 30 years later, as we see on the right, in a reprint of Bonaventure O'Hussey's Catechism on Checas Christi. The setting conforms to a more conventional style. These were the only books known to use this type, so if poor Giovanni was to have any from the later sale of fonts, he hardly made a financial killing from this project. It next appeared in this type specimen which issued from Propaganda of Faith in 1773. On the left, it gives an indication of the number of punches involved in producing this font. And a note suggests that 18 punches and 1 matrix were missing at that stage in 1773. An almost equally extensive sample appeared 12 years later in the specimen book of the Paris printer M. Pierre. Its introduction indicated that this sample was part of the characters of the ancient languages obtained from the printing works of the Propaganda of the Faith in Rome. Possibly resulting from this showing the type, the state printing works in Paris sought to include these novel punches in its collection. Initially a request and later a demand issued from the French authorities to Propaganda of the Faith, ordering that all its foreign punches be appropriated and transferred to complete the magnificent collection in Paris. So 39 boxes of punches for various foreign languages, three printing presses were transferred to the French Academy in 1799. In 1804, the Irish type was used by the director of the National Imprimer National, that's the National Type Archive, J. Marcel. He seems to have taken a particular interest in the Irish font because this is the only one, to my knowledge, where he went to the effort of publishing on the typeface itself. In this book, Alphabet Irlandese, he gives an account of the condition of the punches and matrices on their arrival. He stated that they formed 2 different sizes. The larger ones, he pointed out, was comprised of 56 punches forming 85 matrices and cast on equivalent of 24 points. The smaller was comprised of 80 punches forming 92 matrices, was cast on 16 points, or rather an equivalent of 16 points, since I don't believe the point system was used in France at that time. Marcel found it necessary to repair or replace the damaged punches and to cut new ones so that this concept of the 2 different distinct fonts could act independently with a full supply of upper and lower case in each of his sizes. This refers back to his having to cut a few alternate sorts which allowed the lower case of the large size to be used as an uppercase for the smaller size. In this form, they remained unused, more or less as museum pieces. Their whereabouts later became somewhat of a mystery, and I think it fair to say bewildered and frustrated many of those interested in this material in recent years. In his Irish Character in Print in 1924, the highly regarded Edward W. Lynham, and this is not Lynham on the screen now, but he was confused as to the number of fonts involved, and he wrote that while he had failed to get any information from the Imprimer Nationale, there was little doubt in his mind that both these Rome fonts, with punches and matrices, were still lodged there. Almost 10 years later, in 1932, the Irish language publisher Colm O'Loughlin, seen here, agreed with this when he wrote in his article in the Gutenberg Yearbook that in all probability these types and matrices are still in the Imprimer Nationale, but it seems impossible to get any information from them. And later in this newspaper article in 1961, O'Loughlin asked if some Irish priest residing in or working in Paris could help to trace the Gaelic types, and he appealed, "Can anybody help now?" When my own research interest brought me in pursuit of this material, at that time I had suspected that they had, in fact, already been returned to Rome. And I began a written campaign to try to ascertain that they were indeed there. However, it remained necessary to pursue the French connection. I visited the Imprimer Nationale at its location in Rue de Convention and completed a detailed search of their extensive rare punch collection. This is rather a rare privilege, I was informed, because their collection was housed very securely in a large safe, and few people got in to examine them in this way. Anyway, I had no success in finding the Irish material. I did, however, examine 2 sets of matrices for the Irish type, which I will mention later. More significantly, by chance, I uncovered a copy letter that helped confirm my suspicion. This document states that directly following the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, instructions issued from the Secretary of the State in Rome requesting in the Pope's name the return of those letters. A further request was made by Pope Pius VII himself. Consequently, the punches and matrices were most reluctantly returned. In what appears as a disclaimer to any responsibility for these events, another statement by the director of the archive is attached, which confirms that he had restored the punches and matrices of the collection from the propagation of the faith, and also for a second collection which had been taken from the collection of the Medicis in Florence. And he states that these items were taken back by force under threat of violence by the commissioners of the Tuscan government on the 7th of October, 1815. He stated furthermore that he had, at his own expense, struck fine matrices in copper for all the punches which he was obliged to return. And as a result, he was happy to confirm that the Imprimer Royal continued to hold in this form, in totality, those 2 beautiful collections, which together with their own collection of ancient Oriental punches represented what he claimed was the richest, most complete, and most precious in existence. With regard to the Irish material, 2 sets of matrices are mentioned, are retained there, and are stored today in drawer 215 of a matrix cabinet labeled as follows: matrices Irlandese 16-point Rome 41 matrices, and matrices Irlandese 24-point Rome 91 matrices. And I'll show a slide of those, that material later. But back to this letter, which we just see the cover page, and then just a section from an inventory of the typefaces that were being returned. Shows Irish in 2 sizes with letters of accents. Now, I've repeated myself. The letter I refer to, together with its attached inventory of types, involved what the evidence I needed to establish that the original punches and matrices had been returned in 1815 to the propaganda of the faith in Rome. Despite having written repeatedly and persistently to various officials in the Vatican, it was only as a result of this finding that I was eventually led to this catalogue of punches. I think after my 10th or more letters, I was always replied to most kindly, but towards the end, I was just being asked to desist. They did not have this material. Now, this catalogue confirmed that the Irish punches were among those transferred to the Vatican Press, or in fact, had been transferred from the polyglot press of the propagation of the faith and had been transferred to the Vatican Press, which is a separate institution in the Vatican in 1909 from the Office of the Propagation of the Faith. Now, I show also in this slide a movie poster of a film that came out in the 1950s, Never Take No for an Answer. I think it also issued with the title, The Small Miracle. And in this movie, if anyone has seen it, they'll remember a young Italian chap, Peppino, who wished to have his donkey, who was sick, his donkey, Violetta, blessed in the crypt of the Church of St. Francis of Assisi, only to be refused by authorities because the door just wasn't big enough for the donkey to get in to the annual blessing event. So Peppino embarked on a series of letters and written on his behalf by mayors of villages and bishops in the area, and to no avail, until finally word got to the Pope, and the Pope himself ordered that the door be opened wider and that his donkey could be blessed. But I have gone on with that because I felt the frustration most directly that Peppino felt in dealing with the Vatican. Initiated in 1911, the preparation of this once-off catalogue seems to have been an ongoing project since as late as 1937. It is suggested that entries involving impressions being taken directly from the punches were still being made by an employee there of the press, Mr. Sablini, tasked with the job. The Irish type that I was after was on page 52, shown here as the main image, which shows 145 characters, many of which are depicted in other than an upright form, other than an upright position. Clearly, Mr. Sablini had little knowledge of the Irish type. Included are revisions made by Marcel in Paris, together with a number of sorts which are clearly not part of the Irish font. I've circled a few that the first on the top line in the middle there is the ampersand, the Irish equivalent of an ampersand, and is shown as if it was a V. The odd capital G was on its side. Down on the 7th line, I show a little blob that looks like a V, and as I'll point out later, it was only when inspecting the font in its actual form, the punch rather in its actual form, that it was clear that this was a lowercase t that had its finial tail knocked off. Now, despite further requests, appeals, representations made on my behalf by some well-placed Silesian religious friends there. The Silesians had a particular involvement in the printing efforts of the Vatican. It finally led to an acknowledgement of the existence of this material, and most reluctantly, permission for me to go and examine and record it. With this approval secured, I immediately presented myself to the director of the Vatican Press, as arranged, only to be informed, sorry, we have lost the keys. I calmly, and with as much dignity as I could muster, respectfully pointed out that I had spent many years tracking down this information, this material. And I traveled over 2,000 kilometers to be there as agreed. So the loss of keys was not what I expected to hear. I suggested that I might return in the afternoon and hoped that they may be found in the meantime. Now, what I went about immediately after that, well, I needn't go into detail, but it was very much like phone a friend as the battle lines were being drawn up. But when I returned in the afternoon, all was well. The keys had been found, and I was brought about 3 kilometers south of the Vatican to their location in the basement of an annex building in San Callisto in Trastevere. The punches are presently contained in drawer 10, the bottom of typographic cabinet. I think that's on another slide. Yes, there it is. The punches are presently contained in drawer 10 of the bottom of a typographic cabinet labeled Typotech. A set of 145 punches, which include 7 round fonts, characters, are individually wrapped in paper tubes, each labeled in numerical sequence in accordance with their array. The page number on which the Irish material appears. All of the punches, including the round font characters, are stamped on their side at the base with the number 99, which this rather poor slide indicates. My camera had taken a bit of a nap, I found out later, and the focus was, at least that's my story. You're using, I've got a message here. Okay. Do I just knock that off? I wonder. I don't know. I'll continue. Am I okay, Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Sorry, go ahead there, Dermot.
Okay. Punches from randomly selected examples of the other language sets in this collection are not so marked with this 99. The original matrices are contained in drawer 56 of the upper section of the same cabinet. I don't know if that's obscured now by a message that's up on my screen. After my initial brief inspection, okay, we're back. After my initial brief inspection, and as the protective braces that covered the front of the cabinet were being nailed back in place, the comment was, "That's it then." A few desperate phone calls back to the director explaining that my inspection was likely to take several days brought about a new sense of cooperation, and the relevant material was transported back to the main building, where I was set up in a comfortable office and was allowed to get on with the job. My slide now shows on the top right the set of matrices that were retained in Paris before they were returned to Rome. And they show matrix, which was used to help in extracting the matrix from the hand mold.
I don't know what's happened there. Just for some reason, they've lost the slideshow. So I'm just going to escape out for 1 second for you. And we'll just go back into this. There's no slide. Let's see. What's going on here? Excuse us 1 second now while we try and just sort this out. Now, let's see. Let me just go share screen again.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies now. Sure. What happened there? Now,
now we go to.
Whoops, excuse me.
Slideshow.
Give us 1 second there. We just from current slide.
Yeah.
Is that okay there?
Yeah, that's fine. Am I okay there?
Great.
Apologies there. We just lost the slides for a moment. But as I was saying, that the slide or the matrices shown in the top right-hand corner show that where those taken at the Imprimer Nationale before the material was returned, and it shows the distinctive notch at the base of the matrix used to extract them from the hand mold. These matrices from and the bottom right show their original form, and as Marcel described them as rough copper matrices that weren't properly prepared, leading him to have to make a new set. It does show them in a different form. The image on the left shows us how some of the punches this is in fact the middle side, the three capital letters P, B and H, with the bottom stroke of the H broken off. So it's no wonder in preparing the catalogue there was confusion as to what the letters represented. And on the bottom I show some of the original punches. Some of them bent out of shape, in fact, although it is bewildering because I don't think they were used all that often. It's not uncommon for punches that were put to great use that they might take these shapes. Been there. The drawer open there shows the tubes that were the punches were wrapped in. So after these phone calls to the director, as I say, I was brought back to the main building with the material, and I was allowed to continue with my work. I photographed and took impressions from each punch, and photographed and took a mold impression from each matrix, and arranged them in these displays in alphabetical order while retaining the reference to the catalogue. I also completed a detailed written description of the condition of each punch. Now, insofar as this important Irish type was but one of a number of non-Latin exotic fonts of the propagation collection in Rome that shared a similar fate, this material should, I feel, be of considerable interest to a wider audience of typographic historians. Regrettably, I was informed that I would be the last one to be allowed such access, which I hope was not the case. There was some discussion about moving the cabinet to the Vatican Library, but I cannot confirm if this has happened, being reluctant to enter into another bout of correspondence with them. I show the address and the facade of the building in which they were, and hope that this would help any future researcher to find the material with greater ease than I did. Thank you. That's it. Mary, if you want to go into another mode.
going to go into stop
share.
Stop share there.
Okay.
Lovely.
Excuse me.
And then let's
That brings Jamie in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dermot. Those of us familiar with the museum and familiar with your academic research know only too well your the lengths at which you've gone to research this important material to do with the Irish typeface design and the Irish character in print. That's a fascinating talk about your what can only be described as one facet of your in-depth research, and maybe one of the more dramatic and Sherlock Holmes-esque detective series into the Irish type design. Very, very interesting, and of course, very appropriate when we, are in this particular decade or two of commemorative projects and research to do with the foundation of the state and so on. I guess I see we have some questions in from our viewers. I think, but before we go into that, I sort of came prepared with one or two questions myself, but I might kick us off with a question that has not bothered me, but has certainly interested me for a long time. And that's around the idea of, I should first state that I'm a designer at heart and I make letterpress printed material, but I'm not a type designer and I'm not a type design historian. And so please forgive my ignorance if I ask a silly question. But I noticed on a number of your slides where there's an abundance of punches cut for characters that could be said are no longer in existence in how we express the Irish language, or indeed the English language. And I noticed there's a couple of crossover characters there. I don't have, or do I have? Oh, I do. Hang on. I'm going to pull up a page of Irish type design. Buy it now. It's the new. It's the new thing. It's the cool thing. It's available through the museum, I should add, who are the most recent publishers, and makes a great stocking filler for that type design enthusiast in your life. Okay. So I did mark a page here. So I assume I'm probably on the camera at the moment. Sorry, we're all very technologically at a this is a letterpress museum at the end of the day. We're all at a bit of a disadvantage here. So I'm going to, the question I'm asking alludes to these characters, which are, I guess I see them in a lot of early printed texts, early European printed texts, where they seem like ligatures, they seem like heavily diacritical characters. And I just wondered, maybe Dermot, you might shed some light on where they came from, what part they may have played in the Irish language, and maybe, what journey they took whilst they, disappeared from it.
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question, Jamie, because in fact, the Irish language as it was written and printed back then is very different from the way we express it now. In fact, it went through centuries of, or decades rather, of discussion as to whether we should use the Roman type, which we do now, as distinct from these, what we always considered special letters. So there's much in common, as you rightly pointed out, between the Irish and, say, Anglo-Saxon type. And both relied heavily, as many other typefaces throughout Europe, I'm thinking of even Gutenberg's, that the reliance on manuscript sources was very intentional, as they tried to give the printed page the appearance of a manuscript page. And in the Irish manuscripts, there was abundant, frequent use of these combination letters that we call ligatures of contractions that were used to when coming to the end of a manuscript line that they might use instead of, or rather where they wouldn't have the room to use the full characters. So for this reason, largely, what we now recognize as an alphabet that has just 18 instead of 26 letters, you can see from some of the earlier slides that were up to 50 special characters involved in expressing the Irish at the time. So.
I guess that leads us on to, I see Matt McDonough, one of our viewers, has been quite busy in the Q&A section here, and I think that's still open. You can still ask a couple more questions. There's not a huge amount here to go through. But Matt asks, what are the diacritics in the Louvain example? And I assume you're kind of alluding to those as well.
Well, if I could, well, I probably can't easily get back to that slide, but yeah, the Louvain A example, as I pointed out, showed 3 different sizes of types that could be used as display letters, as capitals for a middle size when it was being used as a lowercase size, and then that lowercase with the addition of a few extra characters could be used as capitals for the smallest set. Now, I don't know if that's what this chap is referring to, but for mainly the small size, there was a large number of combination letters. And in fact, the sample that I showed was, in my opinion, a proofing stage of the type. And that's probably why it was printed so roughly, because later in printed versions, there were even more characters used that didn't appear in that sample. And all of them could be, all the vowels rather, could have accent marks added by, in looking at the punches, you see where there's a shoulder cut into the punch so that a accent could be tied onto the side of the punch, as it were, and the combination then struck to give each punch, or sorry, each matrix the vowel with an accent. So it led to a lot of characters that wouldn't normally be included in printing Irish, and certainly not now.
I guess when I think about the Irish character in print from my days in school, we had it whittled down to quite a refined number. We had an accent over lowercase and uppercase vowels, which we refer to as a fada. Where that name came from, I'm not entirely sure. But I guess when we go back to your time in school or my dad's time in school, there was also other characters such as the long R, the long S, that, you know, became not abbreviated, but they became a TH sound or an SH sound. And I guess, yeah.
So, and another mark that you would have probably learned or been aware of was a sheva, which was the dot over the consonant. And in fact, that had a long history insofar as in manuscript form, it indicated to the scribe that he wanted to perhaps remove that letter by scraping it off the manuscript page. And in early manuscripts, there is evidence of that dot being a H, a superscript H written above the consonant, which then through a need for speed, became a dot. So there's a joint use of dots, one which indicated a H and another a delens, or a removal of the letter, so that an adjustment could be made. But yeah, in modern times, there was great debate between using the Roman type as distinct from the Irish character, and led to huge debate. And it was in my own time in school that in the 60s, it was the Department of Education that finally decided that we move to the use of the Roman type. And it caused a great lot of unhappiness among those who are advocates of the Irish character. But in fact, the Irish character, as Stanley Morrison once so well put it, was really a Roman itself, arrested in time, is how he put it. It just, through tradition and a fondness among the Irish people for their manuscripts, just continued in use. And really, in a time when there was a greater need for accommodating typesetting machines, typewriters, and being part of the modern Western world's communication system, the decision was taken to use the Roman type. But when I returned, I lived in the United States for a while and had lost my fluency, not that it was ever very great, in the Irish language. I was taking courses to bring myself to a level where I could pass the requirement for teaching, which is the Cartastis. And taking notes, my instructor, a young woman, looked over my shoulder and said, "What on earth are you writing?" I had reverted quite without any wish to be different. I had reverted to the old style of writing, as you say, with the long R, long S, and other characters that were different from those that had emerged. And what amazed me was this lady said she had no knowledge of this, and she was an Irish linguist. So I thought that's what prompted me to get involved in the research, so that others might benefit from that interest. Yeah.
Thank you. I see a question in from Martin Brady, which is, I guess, runs parallel to my next question. I was going to ask you, obviously, you know, since the early Middle Ages, Ireland as an island and and its language has had a turbulent, should we say, history. But I wondered into what socio-political environment did the Rome type in particular appear, which I'm trying to say runs parallel to Martin Brady's question, which is, was the typeface over its history used in any way as a political tool by the institutions who owned it or the people who created it?
That's a very good question again, because it most definitely had a social and political role. It was not by coincidence that the first Irish type, which you refer to as the Queen Elizabeth type, was used to promote the doctrines of the Reformed Church, which were at variance with which was almost a 90% Irish-speaking population here, who had a stronger affiliation with their Catholic religion. And so it was that these typefaces that I was talking about, the Louvain and later the Rome, were really being printed on the continent by Franciscans in exile for political reasons, to counter the publishing efforts of the Reformed Church and the establishment in Ireland. And almost consistent with the various upheavals and rebellions in Ireland, there was a renewed emphasis put on the typefaces and the printing of Irish language. Exponents of the Reformed Church have been on record saying that the huge dilemma they were facing. On the one hand, the establishment wanted to stamp out the use of Irish because it promoted, as it were, a sense of nationalism. And on the other hand, if they wanted to reach the Irish-speaking public, they had to use the language themselves. So right through the ages, the link was there between the nationalism in that social sense and the use of Irish language texts and those written and printed in this Irish character. And very briefly, a case in point there was that around the time of the Act of Union, a number of new faces were in fact prepared at that time. And in Galway jail, there was what we'd call like a census put out, and or a questionnaire wondering whether we should use the Irish character should be used or the Roman type. And the response was clearly that the Irish type was preferred, because the warder of the Galway jail said if he has someone come in to read to the inmates who couldn't read, and they noticed that they were reading from a testament that was printed in the Roman type, they just weren't interested in listening.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm trying my best to have a conversation here, but the questions are rolling in fast. So I'm gonna fire another one at you. This one's from Colm O'Bale, who asks, are there any copies of Father Malloy's first book available to view in Ireland? Is that the 1676?
Yeah. O'Malloy's Lochran na Gréabhach. In fact, to my knowledge, a number of unfinished in binding, I think they're just called blocks, were discovered, and there are a number of them just until recently anyway came up in rare book sales. So in Ireland, yes, almost there are very many libraries have this particular book, but yeah, were available to be obtained. These blocks that were unbound, yeah, several hundred of them were found since I started my interest in the subject.
Okay, so they're acquirable with some interest, and no doubt some deep pockets. Niamh McGuinne, who you might know, asks, have you still all of the molds and copies you made in Rome?
Yeah, I have. Yep. The molds are almost like my own set of matrices, in that they're made from a plasticine, which was then possible for me to harden by heat treatment. And if one were to go to the bother, a set of cast type could be made from them. Yeah, I have those, and the impressions in a mold of the punches. So I think I've taken more effort on this than many collectors of punches, etc., would have, because normally it's sufficient to just record, photograph, etc. But I've gone that step further and have the means of making type with what I have. Yeah.
Niamh goes on to ask, would it be possible to make a working set? But I think you've just alluded to the fact that, well, there's a good Christmas project if there ever was one.
Mind you, mattresses are properly used in a very controlled sense. Yeah. That, as you well know, hand molds and molding systems that are very precise to achieve alignment and spacing. But what I have would just allow very casual impressions to be made from them. So a lot of work involved there, but yeah, could be done.
Personally, I've often found myself reverting to the essays and research published by, type historian James Moseley and on his efforts to do with, I guess, early printing types, but I guess he might be more noted for 18th century printing types. But I wondered to myself, do you have much of a relationship with James, or do you cross paths with James very often, or do you share notes or, research subjects?
Not so much in recent years, but most certainly James is a person that I have the highest regard for. He was most helpful in getting me involved in this whole area of research. He was then the librarian at St. Bride's in London, and I had several occasions to discuss and visit him there. But the last time, I think, was at an A-type I conference held here at the Dublin Castle. And James could be distant enough and be selective about who he spent time with. But as I passed him sitting there, I knew he was enjoying the sun in the courtyard of the castle. And he beckoned for me to go over and sit with him. And he shared why he felt so interested. And part of it was to do with the fact that he really harked back to the time of colonial power in Ireland, I thought. But he thought it was a very precious time for him to sit in the courtyard of the Dublin Castle and be in a position to talk about Irish type. Yeah. He's great. He's one of the finest or most highly regarded type historians anywhere, I would suggest.
I think I'd have to agree with that. I think, speaking on my own behalf, anytime I try to research type in any meaningful manner, it always leads to James Moseley, and it always leads to his vigilant approach to typeface design and history. It's quite remarkable. His career is quite remarkable.
Yeah.
I see here
an attendee at the A-type I said that they were just mesmerized with James's presentation. He gave a talk at it, and he said he had in fact forgotten the topic because he thought he could just listen to him read out from a telephone directory all day. Yeah.
There is a question from what begins as an anonymous attendee. Which letters were most commonly damaged in matrix form? But it doesn't stop there. This attendee goes on to ask, in addition to the sine fada as an accent, the buelta or the dot over the letter shevu, this particular attendee identifies herself as Patricia Maloney, in case you are wondering.
Right.
So her question is there, in your experience, I guess, is there obvious research into particular diacritics being damaged in matrix form? Because you showed, I guess, you alluded to the idea of that H being damaged for whatever reason.
Well, the poaches were more susceptible because they were initially cut by files and scribers to form the letter on the tip of a shaft of soft steel. They would then be tempered hard and suitable to punch into a matrix. Sometimes, if the hardening process wasn't done properly, you could wind up with a very brittle punch, which when hammered with some force into the copper matrix, parts, especially the delicate parts of the punch, could be broken off and a new punch would have to be made. I'm not sure how they would have even repaired a punch, although Marcel says he did repair punches. But as to the matrix, it wasn't so common that they would be damaged later. Although again, Marcel said it was more that they would have a complete collection of them in their own archive, that they did a set for themselves. The matrix, nowadays, or in more recent times, a punch would have been put in a machine and then the impression made into the copper matrix in a more controlled way. But in those earlier days, they were just held above the copper and struck with a hammer. And if that strike was made a little off center on the punch, it could dig in an uneven or in a sideways fashion that mightn't have been noticed. And then when the matrix went to be used, it was considered damaged. So in that way, they could be damaged. And then the displacement of the metal caused by the punch being pressed into the copper would cause a bulge to the side of the metal, which created problems when they were being placed into a hand mold. So there's a process called dressing, or justifying rather, that was required there, and the bulge on the punch would have to be filed down or removed before they could be used. And I think some of the original punches shown in one of my slides that came from Rome, it was very noticeable, and I should have pointed that out, that the bulges were still on the matrices.
If we think back to later incunabula or early 16th century printing types in the Roman character, there's a level of finesse and such a high degree of design and production that goes into those punches and into the striking of matrices and again into the printing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that these early Irish characters were given the proper attention? I mean, I guess I'm getting at the idea that there always seems to be a certain crudeness about the early Irish types that seems to have been evaded by the early Roman punch cutters.
Yeah, well, you're quite right. I think although I don't want to confuse people by referring to Roman and then the Irish Rome type, but the Roman as a style had the attention of some of the finest craftspeople to produce those faces. And the whole industry was built up about foundries that produce these types. I'm thinking of Garamond and Bembo and people that were operating at the same time as the Irish type was being produced. Now, compare that with the fascinating point that in the Plantain foundry, it was really a press that had a foundry attached to it, which was one of the biggest presses in Europe at the time. There was an Irishman working there, Thomas Strong. Thomas Strong wasn't a punch cutter, but he was just there doing the fairly routine work of casting type and striking matrices probably. But he, because of his knowledge of Irish, took a real involvement in preparing the Louvain type, which I showed, which in turn influenced the Rome type, which I then say unfortunately influenced a whole range of typefaces that followed right up till recent times. It was George Petrie in the mid-1800s that for the first time produced a typeface for the printing of the annals of the Four Masters, that he produced a typeface that you could say compared favorably with some of the modern Roman types that had a whole history and a lineage there of excellent design. So, see, it was often just the person who was interested in publishing an Irish text that took that interest in having a typeface prepared for it. And often the typeface would have been based on the knowledge of that individual as to how he or she wanted the typeface to look. So it was a much more personal process than one that was controlled by an industrial mechanical process.
I find it fascinating that you mention Petrie, and of course Petrie was making his type in the mid-19th century, and we're all being the whole country is alive at the moment watching RTE's new documentary about the Great Irish Famine and the idea of there being an exodus of Irish people across the world on account of various stresses. And I always found it fascinating that the greatest Irish types of early years were all made by people in exile, or certainly people abroad. Mm-hmm. The appetite, or maybe the the idea that you were allowed perhaps to make Irish types on this soil, always, I mean, for the last number of years has struck me as strange, because when we were living in these times, but of course in those times there was major political, there was a major political, what's the word you're looking for, like a major political element to the idea of the production of type, and of course the production of the printed book.
Yeah.
Patrick Goossens, who we know as another major typographic scholar, hello to Antwerp. Thank you for the great talk. Did you see any other materials related to typecasting at the premises, like hand molds or typecasting machines? And I assume he alludes to your visit to that premises just outside the Vatican.
I'm getting a very broken connection with you there, Jamie. I didn't catch part of what you said, or you identified someone who...
Let me try again. Yeah. Patrick Goossens is watching us from Antwerp. His comment, thank you for the great talk. And his question, did you see any other materials relating to typecasting at the premises, like hand molds or casting machines? And I assume he's alluding to your visit to that premises within the Vatican.
No, the Rome type was, it is suggested, was prepared by this, well, his easier name was John the Teuton. So his works, I've had no access to those. So the propagation of the faith itself was not involved in making types, but would rather commission them. In fact, nor, as I understand it, was the Plantin works, which produced the Louvain types, directly involved in cutting types. But they had a facility there for, as a foundry, which is, well, this gentleman would know all about it coming from Antwerp if he has an interest, but it is well fitted out with examples of the various tools that would be used at the time. But it was, as I say, the Thomas Strange, sometimes referred to as Strange, Strong, who also appears in the City of Antwerp records, where he's listed as a type founder. He would, I think, have been commissioned. Well, he worked directly at the Plantin works, so he would have been given the job to prepare this Louvain type, whereas their better typefaces would have been commissioned from type designer. Well, they wouldn't have been called type designers at the time, but punch cutters. That's why I think the Irish type has such a crude appearance. It relied on someone who just hadn't got the skills to do the job. Now, I don't know that that answers the question. I think it was more to do, did I find any evidence of the type making tools? No, was the answer to that.
I know Patrick personally, and I know what he's barking after. He wants to know whether that you meant you saw anything to do with typecasting as a practice at that premises.
No. At the premises in Rome, no.
Yeah. Sorry, Patrick. So just to try and wrap this up, I think we've had a reasonably good conversation there. Good few questions from our listeners and audience. The very first question that arrived in this afternoon is in keeping with the last question that I had penned last night. Do you think, from Matt McDonough again, who was busy, do you think there is any appetite for a revival of Clo? Or my question would have alluded to, do you think there's an appetite for a revival in the Irish type design, which I know is an ongoing question with many of our colleagues across several disciplines. But I guess, you know, these early Irish printing types and true to Petrie and true again to Colm O'Loughlin and such, you know, is there room for development?
Well, of course there is. There are one of the greatest positives out of my own research is that I may have influenced in some little way through my book an interest among young type designers. And it's so encouraging and fascinating to see all of the many different fonts that are being produced because of, well, I'm not going to say it's easy to do it, but it's a lot easier to do it now using Fontographer and whatever is going system. But so yes, I think there's plenty of room for that, and it's great to see so much work being done in that area. Even in the context of metal punch cutting, there has been an interest. Certainly Jim Rimmer, who I think anyone who's really interested in type design will know, a Canadian type cutter who unfortunately is deceased now. But Jim, one of the last projects he was involved in was in discussion with myself as to how he might go about cutting new punches for what we call the Moxon Irish typeface. And that is another fascinating story, the history of that particular typeface. So Jim was one of the handful of punch cutters capable of doing the job now who wanted to do that. Also, Colm O'Loughlin got involved, who I mentioned, the proprietor of the Three Kansas Press and his Colm Kill type. He got involved with Victor Hammer, an Austrian type designer, and had his Irish types designed. And Theo Rahek, an American type designer, has cut updated versions of that Bauhin type and based on Hammer's unseals. I have Mary beside me here. Is there something?
No, my own is.
Okay, yeah.
My own has died,
unfortunately. Okay. Well, yeah, we've had a few issues, I think, with this presentation, but I hope it came across well. Yeah.
I think Theo is currently off the scene due to for whatever reason. And my understanding is that a lot of Jim Rimmer's material is currently with Jason Duenitz of the Green Boathouse Press in British Columbia, in Vernon, British Columbia.
Yeah.
One final question has come in, and I think after this one we might wrap it up. Does Dermot have a contract email? Well, no doubt, but a contact email too. A certain attendee has some Clo Gaelic typefaces to run past interested parties, and maybe that's something we might make available to that person directly. So I think I certainly have. I'm out of questions.
I think yes.
I'm full of new knowledge.
Jamie, you can assure anyone who wants to contact me. I think that's through the print museum, the National Print Museum here, and I'll get those messages and return to those. Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. And the Print Museum's contact details are readily available. Yeah. So thank you, Dermot. I think that was a nice inaugural afternoon lecture at the Print Museum. And oh, I see Patrick Goosens has slipped in with the Theo Rehak materials in Antwerp. Of course it is. Patrick Goosens is collecting over there like a man on fire.
Oh, I see, yeah. Well, Theo, as he probably knows then, did cut a new casting of Hammer's Uncial for a symposium that they had at the Three Lakes that college up in upper state Wells College in upstate New York. Yeah, that was about 10 years ago, I think, maybe more.
So I guess I'm going to thank the museum for allowing this this lecture and this conversation to happen, and for pioneering, I guess, this idea of trying to keep the Irish interest in printing history alive. And I'll just give it back to you, Dermot. Maybe you can sign us off.
Yes, I would be happy to, and it was a great experience for me. It was my first attempt on Zoom to give such a lecture, and I'm sure it wasn't quite as coherent as it might otherwise have been, but I thank the Print Museum here for setting it up and allowing me to give this talk. And I'm always happy if I can gather a few people together to talk about Irish type, and it was a great opportunity for me. Thank you.
Yeah, let's do it for a second. I'll just rotate to myself.
Yeah, oh, that's good.
Sorry, just socially distance over here. Just on behalf of the museum, thank you very much to both yourself, Jamie and Dermot. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon and for giving us such a lovely talk and a great discussion. Thank you to everyone for joining and taking part in the afternoon. We really enjoyed it here as well. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do more of this in the future. And with that, we shall say goodbye. And for anyone who's watching, I think we might have a glitch at some point, but I think the majority of it has been recorded. So hopefully we'll be able to send it on to people after that. So with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you all. And I will stop the recording there now.